And so last week, Pastor Steve did a little bit of my review. It was Called and Equipped Part 1, and tonight we're on Called and Equipped Part 2. So I'm really excited to be here once again. My name is Treena, and I'm the pastor over Living Free Recovery Services, and we're a licensed outpatient substance abuse program that's housed here at Living Word. So if you've never been here before and you don't know anything about us, or you didn't get a chance to see me last week, I wanted to make sure you knew a little bit about where I come from and what I do here at Living Word. I came here in 1997 as an intern, and I never, ever left. And so it's been a really great ride. I shared, as Pastor Steve said, a little bit about my testimony, my path to standing where I am here today. So who was actually here last week? So I kind of get a feel for, okay, so we had some return people. Good. Some of you weren't. You won't have to understand everything I talked about last week in order to understand this week's message, but feel free to watch it online so you can get the full picture. What triggered this in me was when I came in 1997 as an intern, I came as a 22-year-old white suburban girl who'd never had a drug and alcohol problem, coming into work at a treatment center, and I just really had some questions like, am I really going to be able to do this? Are people really going to respect me working here? And so at the time, Pastor Chris Callison, who's the founder of Living Free Recovery Services, looked and he said to me, he said, Treena, if God's called you to do it, he's equipped you to do it. And so that's where the title and the series came from, and those are the words that I continue to stand on over and over and over and over again, because this walking out the plan of God for your life isn't always easy. And sometimes we have questions, and at least sometimes I have questions, and sometimes I have doubts. And so the Bible verse that we kicked off with last week is 1 Corinthians 1, 26 through 29. And I read it from the Amplified Version. It says, just look at your own calling, believers. Not many of you were considered wise according to human standards. Not many powerful or influential. Not many of high and noble birth, but God has selected for his purpose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, revealing their ignorance. And God has selected for his purpose the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong. God has selected for his purpose the insignificant, basic things of the world and the things that are despised and treated with contempt, even the things that are nothing, so that he might reduce to nothing the things that are, so that no one may be able to boast in the presence of God. I think most of us could probably look at different times in our life and say that we felt insignificant, or maybe that we felt like nothing, or maybe we feel like we don't have what it takes to do what God's asking us to do. And what's really cool is if you've ever felt like that, this just told us you qualify. You qualify. You're the perfect candidate if you've ever felt like a nothing. Whew. Don't you want to say amen to that one? Yeah. Last week, after I went through that acronym, the HOPE, we ended with something called the TNT Challenge. Who remembers what the TNT Challenge was? Today, not tomorrow. We had a couple hands there. That's good. Today, not tomorrow. And I challenged people. Maybe it was to make a decision for Christ, today, not tomorrow. Maybe it was to call out and seek God's face, just like in that video, and find out what is it that you're called to do. And then once you find that out, are you going to obey? Are you going to do that? And so we went through a TNT challenge, and guess what? You're going to have a second shot tonight. So if you missed it last week, and God was telling you, like, you should have been up there, he's giving you another chance tonight. So last week's acronym of HOPE really shared some things that you needed to do. Hear, obey, prepare, pursue, persevere, expect. Things that kind of are on you to start. This week's going to be a little bit different. I want to continue to share more about my journey of walking out God's call on my life. And guess what? I have another acronym, so I hope you can remember this one too. One thing that I think is important for all of us to know and remember is that as you start to walk out your calling, God is not the only one who notices. The enemy and Satan, he also notices. He notices. He watches. And if you heard in the video, each person's calling was meant to impact, like some people, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people. And I think sometimes when we talk about walking out our calling, we're very focused on obeying what God called us to do, and we're focused on ourselves. But we have to remember that there's still millions of people out there just waiting for you to happen. You might be the only one that can touch that one person's life. So you walking out your calling isn't just about you. In fact, it's really not about you at all. It's about the people, the gifts in you coming out and impacting the people that might not be reached by anybody else. Touching the life of someone that everybody else might just pass by. So because you walk out your calling, and you have that ability to impact so many people, the devil wants to make sure that he does everything he can to stop you. God's there to empower you, but there's also somebody else trying to stop you. And that's not really a secret. The Bible's pretty clear in telling us about that. 1 Peter 5:8 says, stay alert. Stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. So he's telling you that. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Pretty clear. John 10:10, the thief comes only to kill, steal, and destroy. So just those two verses alone, we get a pretty big picture that there's somebody out there trying to mess with your life, prevent you from doing what God's called you to do. You won't believe the stories that happen when people make a decision maybe to get sober, to make a change at Living Free. They make that commitment. This is what I want to do. I want to get sober. I'm going to sign up. I'm coming to your treatment groups. And it's like the devil's just trying to keep them stuck at that early phase when it's the hardest to reach out. And so it's like cars break down, sickness hits the family, deaths in the family, relationship chaos. It's like all of a sudden the term all hell breaks loose really starts to happen. And he's really there just trying to push people down so they don't walk out that plan that God has for them. He sees somebody making a push, and so it's like, I'm going to throw some trouble their way before they get enough time, knowledge, and get into our program for us to help them understand that, hey, God's there to help you, and you can be victorious over anything in your life. So I'm not one to really overtalk the devil, but we at least have to know that he's real. He is out to stop the plan of God, plain and simple. There isn't really much more to say about that. So while last week I was telling you things you need to do, tonight I'm going to share a little bit about some tactics used by the enemy that we need to stop. So there, I just gave it away. So that's your acronym tonight. Stop. 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 So the first one, S, self-doubt. Self-doubt. So the real question that we usually ask ourselves is, do I have what it takes? Do I have what it takes? So I shared with you last week a little bit about my own self-doubt that really prompted some of the material for my messages. And I know that I'm not the only person who's ever experienced self-doubt. Would you all agree with me? Make me feel a little better. Raise your hand if you're, okay, thanks. Good. So I like to look at the Bible for some examples. So I'm like, well, if the people in the Bible experience this, this isn't new to any of us here on earth. And so you'll get a couple of your basic Bible stories tonight from me too. So I want to start with Moses. And the story of Moses, we're going to talk about is in Exodus 3, where I'm going to pick up. And Moses is out basically keeping the flocks for his father-in-law. And God shows up and speaks to him in a burning bush. I think most of us have heard that story about the burning bush. So God shows up, he speaks to Moses in a burning bush, explaining that, his people, the Israelites, are basically slaves in Egypt and they need to be rescued. So if we look at verse 9, I think this is the New Living Translation. This is God talking, and he says, "Look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me. I've seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you," we'll see that again, "to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt." But Moses protested to God, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" Do you hear a little bit of self-doubt there? God answered, "I will be with you. And this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain." So I think it's interesting there in verse 11, Moses was protesting. And maybe some of you have done the same thing with God, argued with God, protested when he's asked you to do something. But he asked God, he says, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" And when I looked at God's response, I'm like, God didn't even answer his question. He just kind of ignored that. And he just says, "I'll be with you." He didn't answer Moses' question. Just skimmed right over it and says, "I'll be with you." Chapter 4, verse 1 says, "But Moses protested again." I've done that too. And he says, "What if they won't believe me or listen to me?" That's kind of was my thing. What if they won't even listen to me? What if they say the Lord never appeared to you? And in verse 10 it says, "But Moses pleaded with the Lord." And so he's still going. He protested, now he's pleading. It says, "But Moses pleaded with the Lord, 'Oh Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been, and I'm not now. Even though you've spoken to me, I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled.'" Verse 13, "But Moses pleaded." He's just like going at it hard here. "But Moses pleaded, 'Lord, please send anyone else.'" Many of us have had these same pleadings with God. Just like I taught last week, Moses heard and then he obeyed. He did return to Egypt and he did what God asked him to do. After all the begging, all the pleading, he finally just gave in. He got over his self-doubt because he put his trust in the Lord. God told him, "I will be with you." God's telling you the same thing. Maybe you've pleaded, you've begged, "Lord, send somebody else, anybody else. I don't want to do this. I don't want to go there." But God will be with you. So it's time for all of us, including you, to set aside your self-doubt and do what God is asking. Just like in the video, Accountant Jones, he's like, but I was a pastor. I had a congregation of right? That's not what I called you to do, we said. So it's so important that we do what God is asking. The next story Bible character I was looking at was Gideon. I was looking at the story of Gideon. And so Gideon, the story of Gideon, he starts in about Judges 6. And so I'll paraphrase a little bit about Gideon. The people of Israel were in the promised land, but they were there worshiping an idol. They were worshiping Baal. And the Midianites, for like several years, just would come into their land every year around the time of harvest and take away all their crops of grain until the Israelites basically had no food for themselves, none for their sheep or their cattle. And then the Midianites would also bring their flocks in and their camels and everything and just let them eat and graze all the grass in the field. And so the people of Israel were kind of like driven away from their villages and their farms. They would like hide in the caves and in the mountains. And if any Israelite could like raise some kind of grain, they would bury it in pits, they'd cover it up, or in empty wine presses, it said, where the Midianites couldn't find it and take it away from them. So one day Gideon was outside, he was threshing out wheat. Okay, I don't know exactly what that means. What does that mean? Threshing out wheat. No farmers in here. Okay. But he sees this angel sitting under an oak tree, and the angel said to him, "You are a brave man, Gideon, and the Lord is with you." Oh, we've heard that before. "Go out boldly and save your people from the Midianites." And so then he gets some further instructions. The Lord tells Gideon, the first thing you need to do is get rid of those idols. He basically gave Gideon permission to vandalize. What do you guys think about that? He's like, go destroy those idols. And then he built like a new altar, to the Lord in their place. And so built that altar to God. And then he starts working with Gideon on his army. And he had it said here about 32,000 people. And the Lord said to him, no, your army's too large. He says, too large. If Israel should win the victory, they would say we won it by our own might. Send home all those that are afraid to fight. And 22,000 people went away. Leaving only 10,000 in Gideon's army. I mean, if I was in his shoes, I'd be freaking out. Like, what? 32,000, 22,000 go home. And then there's a little bit more to the story, and the Lord's kind of like, no, your army's still too big. Well, basically it gets down to 300 people. That's what the Lord wanted, 300 people. So he went from 32,000 to 300 people. Wow. But they were victorious. Why? Because God was with them. God was with them. But I want to go back and read a few verses directly from the Bible. I just wanted to paraphrase the story a little bit. But in Judges 6, I'm going to look at verses 14 through 16 out of the New Living Translation. It says, "Then the Lord turned to him and said, 'Go with strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you.'" It's kind of like what he told Moses. "But Lord," Gideon replied. Here we go, right? "But Lord," Gideon replied, "how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family." The Lord said to him, "What? I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man." So here we have the same example again where Gideon says, how can I rescue Israel? How can I do this? And God just doesn't even answer that question. And what does he say back? I will be with you. So then Gideon went on, he asked God for a sign, and God gave him a sign, and then he still wasn't sure, and he asked for another sign, and he continued to doubt himself, and was he really hearing from God? Is this what God wanted him to do? But the Lord continued to tell him, "Do not be afraid, I will be with you, you will not die." So when you are in doubt, when you are afraid, you need to know that God will be with you. Stepping out into your calling can be really scary. And I think many of us could identify with that. But you can have comfort knowing that God will be with you. Do you really believe it, though? That's the question I wrote. Do you really believe it? I know it's really nice to say, the Lord's with me, God's going to be with me, I can do this, I can do all things, God's going to be with me. But really ask yourself, do you really believe it? You cannot let self-doubt keep you. You need to trust in the Lord and know what? If he called you to do it, he's going to be there every step of the way because he's equipped you to do it. So God's sending you somewhere, and he'll be with you all the way, and there will be lives that will be impacted because of your obedience. All right, that was S, self-doubt. T, temptation. Temptation. We know since the beginning, right in the Garden of Eden, that that's been a tactic of the enemy, right? Temptation. Satan tried to tempt Jesus himself when he was here walking on the earth, and so we're not exempt from this tactic either. I looked up the definition of temptation. It says to entice or allure, to do something often regarded as unwise, wrong, or immoral. Matthew 26:41 says, keep actively watching and praying that you may not come into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. I'm sure we all can think of things in our life like, my spirit is willing to be thin, but my body is weak when I come across that donut or sesame chicken or lasagna, I don't know. 1 Corinthians 10:13 out of the NLT says, the temptations in your life are no different from what others experience, and God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. Maybe you've been in a tempting situation and you just don't seem to see the way out. There is a way out. God will show you a way out. So I want to tell you a story about one temptation that I faced along the way in walking out God's plan for my life. I don't think at the time I would have thought of it as a temptation, but as I kind of look back on my life, I can see how it would have completely changed the course of my life if I wouldn't have made the right decision. And so when I was 15 years old, I had a boyfriend. I was in high school, and I had a boyfriend, and we ended up dating for over 4 years. And probably from about age 13 to 17, while I never stopped believing in God or loving God, I wasn't really going to church. I wasn't really actively pursuing my relationship with God. I got busy having, jobs and things like that. And so around age 19, was about the time that I came to this church, and I kind of had that little nudge on the inside of me that I'd been away from God and that I needed to start changing some things in my life and that I needed to come back to the Lord. Well, the guy that I was in a relationship with wasn't interested in pursuing a relationship with God at all. I really loved his family. I'd been a part of their family for 4 years. Him and I got along great. We didn't have any fights or any problems or anything like that. But I knew that we're either going to stick together forever and get married, and if that's the case, I knew that we had to be on the same page spiritually, or it was going to be over. And my mom, she'd been praying. Moms are always praying. My mom, she'd been praying either that this boy's going to get saved or that the relationship's going to end. And so I remember just being at that point in my life, having the discussion with him, like, hey, this is an important part of my life. This is the direction I want my life to go. And he's like, this is all about your mom. She's making you do this. I'm like, no, this isn't about my mom. Yeah, she's been praying, but this is my own decision. And I had to make the decision, basically, am I going to choose a life with God and give up something that my flesh really wanted? Or am I just going to do my own thing and stay in the relationship and hope that things would work out? And so I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I had to do. And I had to end that relationship. And as I was putting this together, it was seriously 23 years ago to the day. I remember it's November 16th because it's one of my good friend's birthdays. It was 23 years ago today that I made that decision to end the relationship. And I cried and I cried and I cried, and it hurt and it was hard. And you were used to all of those routines. Well, on Friday night, we used to go here and we used to do this and we used to do that. And so for lots and lots of months, it was really, really hard. We tried to be friends and get together. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. And so if I wouldn't have made that decision, I don't really know where my life would have gone. I don't know if I would have just completely run away from God. I don't know. God always works hard to get us back on track, but the plan in my life probably would have been greatly delayed. So that would have been November 23 years ago. The following February, I decided to go on a blind date. The first one I've ever been on in my whole life. The last one I've ever been on, because he's now my husband of 19 years sitting on the front row. Blind date, yes. So, I just think about all of those things. What if I wouldn't have made that one decision? What if I would have given into that temptation of my flesh to stay in that relationship? That was really a crucial point in my life. Maybe that speaks to you. Maybe you're in a relationship that's going nowhere. Maybe God's prompted you to cut off unhealthy relationships, unhealthy friendships. This is a huge challenge for people in our program seeking recovery, trying to get rid of those friendships that have been around for a long time, but maybe have been centered around drug use and alcohol use. But it's really crucial for their sobriety. And it's hard to say goodbye to people, especially when you don't have new people to hang out with yet. We all have different types of temptations that get us off track. It might even be things that look good, like a job offer, an opportunity at another church. Those things in themselves aren't wrong, but maybe that's not where God's calling you to be. And on the other hand, I think we know there are other types of temptations, whether it's drugs, alcohol, pornography, fleshly desires, donuts, yeah. They can get us off track in a major way. Oreo cookies, Sean? Yeah. Temptations are something that will constantly come across your path. We can't rid the world of all of them, right? The devil will use them to get you off track. So you need to be aware and you need to be prepared. So S, we need to stop self-doubt. T, we need to stop giving in to temptations. O is about obstacles. Obstacles. We all come up against obstacles. The ones I faced in my journey aren't very interesting. I'm not going to share a lot about them. I don't even remember a lot of them. They were just minor things that I had to overcome to be successful in God's plan. But my favorite Bible example about somebody that faced obstacles on a repeated basis and still came out at the other side is the story of Joseph. Not Mary and Joseph, but Old Testament Joseph, son of Jacob. Joseph with the coat of many colors. Joseph in the amazing Technicolor dream coat, right? Is that how we think of it? This is a man who had obstacles. How many of you know the story of Joseph? Some of you? All right. Some of you, it might be a review. Some of you, it might be brand new. Joseph, his life story, we start in Genesis 37. He was basically the youngest brother, and he was his daddy's favorite. He was his daddy's favorite. And so he received this coat of many colors, and that basically, showed how much of a favorite he was. So his brothers noticed that he was the favorite, and they hated him. They didn't like it. And so then he has this dream, and he goes and tells his brothers the dream, and basically the dream interprets that at some point his brothers would be bowing down to him. So think about that. They already are jealous. They already hate him. And then he's comes hey guys, I had this dream, and someday you're all going to be bowing down to me. Bad idea. So his brothers, they conspire to kill him and throw him in a pit. And they're like, well, we're just going to tell Dad that a beast devoured him. So they're having this plan. One brother's like, well, let's not kill him, but let's still put him in the pit. All right, so we got one that like at least saves his life. And so they take him, they throw him in a pit. These traders come by, take him out of the pit, and they bring him, and he gets sold into slavery. He was sold to a man named Potiphar, and Potiphar was an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard in Egypt. So Potiphar was a powerful man. In Genesis 39:2, though, despite all of these obstacles, it says, the Lord was with Joseph. And if you were going through all of this, I don't know if you'd be going, oh yeah, the Lord is with me. I just came out of the pit, and I'm naked, and I'm sold into slavery, and my brothers all hate me. And it says the Lord was with Joseph. So he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master, Potiphar. So things are kind of going good for a little bit. And then Potiphar's wife comes along, and she tries to seduce Joseph. She tries to get him into bed, and he knows this is wrong, and he runs, and she has basically his coat and basically cries like, look, your servant was inappropriate with me. And so now Joseph gets put in prison. He gets put in prison. Another obstacle. He's just trying to walk out God's plan here. Another obstacle. Genesis 39:21 says, but the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love, and the Lord made Joseph a favorite within the prison. So it's like no matter where he went, no matter what obstacle he faced, I think he probably had a good attitude and just knew the Lord was with him, and he continued to find favor. Whether it was who he got sold to as a slave, now he's in prison. He was there for 2 years. He basically gets forgotten. Other people get let out before him. But he had this whole little deal with being able to interpret dreams. And he ends up interpreting a dream for Pharaoh. So Pharaoh they get him out of jail, and he goes, and he's basically put in charge over Egypt. There's famine in the land. That's what the dream was about. But there was famine in the land. And here comes Joseph's brothers coming into Egypt because they need to buy some food. They don't know what's happened to their brother. They didn't even recognize Joseph as they are approaching to purchase food for the family. This is a very short version. I would encourage you to read the story. But he eventually reveals himself to his brothers. And he cries, and they're shocked. And I think what's amazing is he comes out of there, he's got no resentment, no resentment at all towards his brothers. He sees that God had a calling on his life, that he was sent before them to make provision for the family and provide for their needs. So, wow, I know that was a quick version, but I don't think any of us have probably faced those obstacles, right? But the whole time it says, what we've talked about from the beginning, and God was with him. God was with him. So a few key points from this story: when you have obstacles, know that the Lord will be with you, and remind yourself of that when you're facing an obstacle. You won't always understand why you are in the situation you are in. It will probably seem not fair. It didn't seem probably pretty fair to Joseph either to be in prison and that his own brothers did that to him. Push through the obstacles, and you will end up in a place that's over and above what you ever thought you could achieve, right? Are you still here? I know the backs of these seats aren't comfortable, and so if you need to shift a little, it's okay. Yeah. So we're on P, S-T-O-P, stop. So we had self-doubt, temptations, obstacles. The other thing we got to stop dealing with is problems. P is for problems. What time is it? Okay, we're doing good. Problems. I don't really have a whole lot to say about problems because I think all of us know what a problem is. I think we've all experienced problems, past and present. I think I can promise you'll have some future problems. You can read through the Bible, you can talk to friends, you can watch TV and know that there's problems everywhere. Yeah? Problems at times can seem overwhelming. They can exhaust you physically, emotionally, every sense of the word, they can exhaust you. There's something that can cause you to quit the journey that you are on. And that's my biggest point, is if we're trying to walk out what God's called us to do, and we're trying to stop the tactics of the enemies, we can't quit when problems hit, right? I didn't mean to make that rhyme. That was good. We can't quit when problems hit. And we can't be surprised that problems hit. It's part of the journey here on earth. Now, there are problems that we get ourselves into, and there are some problems that just sometimes seem to find us. And so it might be time for you to stay out of drama and avoid some of the problems that you don't need to be involved in. There are some people that kind of thrive on crisis and just are always involved in problems. You might know those people in their life. You're like, oh my gosh, I've never talked to somebody with so many problems. And so you might have to just look at your own life and go, okay, what are some things I just need to disconnect from? I need to minimize the problems in my life. And if you make wise choices, you can prevent some of those problems from happening. But ultimately, we still all will face some problems. And you may find as you have come through problems in your life that they've built your character a little bit. Hopefully you've learned some things in the process of coming through them. And you know what? There's Bible verse after Bible verse about how God, once again, will be there with us through our problems. And so I encourage you to find those verses, but more importantly, say them. Say those verses when you're in the midst of the problems. So, I don't know, a year or so ago, I did a teaching back at Living Free. It was called Talking to Your Problems. And while I was preparing it, the Lord just spoke these words to me as I was sitting in my desk, and I just started typing. And I want to share those with you tonight as I start to wrap up. These are the words he had about start talking to your problems. It says, you don't have to be run over by problems day after day. Start speaking to them before they ever make it your way. The Lord is there to take care of you, concerned and caring about all that you do. We've been given so much through the gift of his Son. Look your problems straight on and say, hey, I got this. I won. Victory is yours if you choose it to be. Read my word and put your trust in me. Speak to the mountain and it will be gone. My grace and mercy is there at each break of dawn. My love never ends, for you are my child. With me by your side, your problems are mild. Go into the world with your head held high, knowing that I am always nearby. I remember I came out of my office and I'm like, the Lord told me something. I don't know, do you ever get excited like that when you know that you know that you know that you heard something from God? Because sometimes I don't know. And I was really excited. I don't know, maybe my employees remember that. I'm just like, the Lord gave me this. And I wasn't expecting it. So the things we want to watch out for and we want to stop in our life were, what was S? Self-doubt. T was? O was? P was? Problems. So we had some things we had to do when we learned about the hope, and now we have the word stop that I want you to think those things through. And so as I close, I want to remind you that last week I issued this TNT challenge to you. You can go play, Miss Jerry, if you. Thank you. I have no musical talent, so I so appreciate those that do. So last week I ended with this TNT, Today Not Tomorrow challenge. And, maybe you were here last week and you're like, I really should have gone up there. I really needed to go up and say, yes, Lord. That was basically what the challenge was about. It was say, yes, Lord. Maybe you're here for the first time tonight and know that the things I talked about might be holding you back. So I'm going to ask all of you, just like I did last week, if there's somebody that needs to say yes, Lord, whether it's to having a relationship with him, walking out the plan he has for you, if if you're ready to say, yes, Lord, I want you to come up here in a moment and kind of make your stand, make your statement right here at the altar in front of all of us. It might be, yes, Lord, I'll do what you called me to do. Or, yes, Lord, I'm no longer going to stay stuck in self-doubt. Lord, I refuse to give into those temptations that keep coming across my path. Yes, Lord, I will remember that you are there with me through every obstacle and every problem. When are we going to do this? Today, not tomorrow. We're not promised tomorrow. You know, when I reflect back on the video, and maybe we sometimes are envious of other people's callings, and we're like, well, wow, she gets to be up there and talk in front of people, and I'm just a blah, 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 blah. You're not just a blah, 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 blah. Guess what he said to that mom of 3 boys? That's what I called you to do, and look at all the lives that were touched. You'll never know until we reach heaven how many lives that we've touched. But all I know is I want to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. I don't want everything that I did here on earth to be burned up because I wasn't doing what God told me to do. Only you know. He talks to you and tells you. So tonight again, if you need to say yes, you need to take on this TNT challenge. Yes, Lord, I want you to come on up and just stand here. That's you signifying that you're ready to say yes.